In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the ignition module assembly on a Troy-Bilt Backpack Blower. The harness is secured to the blower with 4 nuts. We'll go ahead and remove those. Now I can pull the harness away from the blower. Now I'm going to remove 1/2 of the impeller housing assembly. It's held in place with a series of screws. Now I have access to the impeller and I can remove it. It's held in place with 4 screws. Now I can remove the other half of the impeller housing assembly. It's secured to the rest of the blower with 4 screws on this side of the housing and 3 on the other side. Now I need to remove this clip from the inside of the impeller housing. This clip secures the throttle cable on the opposite side. I'll just use some pliers to squeeze the clamp back together and push it through the housing. And now I can pull the housing away from the blower. Now that we've removed the other half of the impeller housing, we can remove the engine housing. It's held in place with just a few more screws. Now we have access to the ignition coil and we can remove it. I'll start by pulling the wires away. First the spark plug wire away from the spark plug, and then the ignition wire away from the coil. And now I'll remove the 2 ignition coil mounting bolts. Now I can install the new ignition coil. I'm going to rotate the flywheel until the magnets on the flywheel are straight up and down. These magnets will align with the pads on the ignition coil. Now I'll place the ignition coil back up against the engine and loosely install the mounting bolts. One of the bolts goes through the ground wire, then I'll insert the other bolt. Now I need to set the air gap between the flywheel and the ignition coil. To do that, I'll use a gapping tool. If you don't have one of these tools, a business card will usually be the proper thickness. I'll lift up the coil and insert the card between the flywheel and those pads on the coil. Now I can tighten up the mounting screws. And remove the gapping tool. Now I can replace the ignition wire and the spark plug wire. Now we can replace the engine cover. Now I'll reattach the cable clip back to the other half of the impeller housing. Now I'll begin resecuring the impeller housing back to the motor. Now I can reinstall the 4 screws on the inside of the impeller housing. I'll want to put a little bit of Loctite on these screws. Now I can install the impeller. I'll want to use a little bit of Loctite on these screws. Now realign the hose with the impeller housing and reinstall the opposite side of the housing. And now secure the housing with the screws. And we'll finish up by reinstalling the harness.